does not take sides against Germany, her integrity will be respected at the end of the war.
For those who cared to read, the writing was on the wall. It was noted in the Foreign Office that Germany practically admits the intention to violate Belgian neutrality. Foresight and happy chance now came together. That month, at Spithead, on July the 18th, the British fleet had assembled for a royal review. The Royal Navy was the mistress of the seas. 232 vessels assembled at Spithead, 40 miles of warships, 59 battleships, 55 cruisers, 78 destroyers, 70,000 men. It was an impressive display, and the world was suitably impressed. On July the 29th, the fleet was due to disperse. The First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, decided otherwise.
Admiralty to Commander-in-Chief Home Fleets, July 28, 1914, sent 5 p.m. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the First Fleet is to leave Portland for Scapa Flow. Destination is to be kept secret.
And so, in secrecy, the last act of July the 29th took place. The Royal Navy on its way to its war station.
We may now picture this great fleet, scores of gigantic castles of steel wending their way across the misty, shining sea, like giants bowed in anxious thought. 18 miles of warships, bearing with them into the broad waters of the north the safeguard of considerable affairs. The king's ships were at sea.
With the fleet at Scapa Flow, the British government could breathe more easily. The days of France's agony were now beginning. For in France also, mobilization was part of a plan, and the government of the Republic was as much a prisoner of its plan as were Russia and Germany. On July the 29th, the French Minister of War signed an order for the concentration of the covering forces behind which the French army would assemble. France's plan was in motion. It was very simple. Relying on the Napoleonic principles of speed and violence, the whole French army was prepared to hurl itself across the German frontier. In one vast phalanx, it would sweep towards the Rhine, catching the Germans off balance. The object was to defeat them before their own plans could take effect. It only awaited the word. The last hours of July were running out, and Europe's last entertainments with them. British people were still going off for continental holidays. But the flame on the European fuse had nearly reached the powder. On July the 31st, Sir Edward Grey sent identical telegrams to Paris and Berlin.
I trust the situation is not irretrievable. But in view of prospect of mobilization in Germany, it becomes essential to ask where the French government is prepared to engage to respect neutrality of Belgium, so long as no other power violates it. A similar request is being addressed to the German government. It is important to have an early answer.
The French government replied at once. They would respect Belgian neutrality, unless violated by another power. Germany did not reply directly. Her mood that day was difficult to analyze. A British diplomat in Berlin was watching it closely.
The people looked serious, but not in any way depressed. The song Deutschland über alles was continually heard. Otherwise, there was very little evidence of Jingo sentiment. There was a feeling difficult to describe of something like electricity in the air.
In the neighborhood of Berlin, the stations are surprisingly empty. In the suburbs, where one ordinarily finds large crowds, the streets are empty. A serious expression marks the travelers.
Certain acts of the German government heightened the tension. 1:45 p.m., Germany declares a state of danger of war, the immediate prelude to full mobilization. 3:30 p.m., the German government addresses Russia and France. Russia is told that unless she demobilizes within 12 hours, full mobilization in Germany will follow. The German ambassador in Paris is told that mobilization means war. France is asked for guarantees of neutrality. Events were moving rapidly out of the control of monarchs and statesmen.
The spectre of war was no longer an imagination of cranks, but obvious to all, solid and menacing.
In Paris, sensation followed sensation. There was the trial of Madame Caillot, wife of the combative, controversial socialist ex-premier.
In this drama of love and politics, a beautiful woman has shot dead the editor of Le Figaro because he had wronged her husband and published a number of his political and love letters. The story of an intrigue almost beyond the novelist's imagination, this trial has magnetized all France.
But on July the 28th, astoundingly, she was acquitted of murder. Riots broke out in the streets. Then Jean Jaurès, the socialist leader, was assassinated, and cavalry on their way to war stations were detained in Paris for fear of revolution. Thousands gathered outside the banks. The Bank of France announced that it would pay out no more than 50 gold francs a fortnight to each depositor. In Germany, there was a panic run on gold. All through July, the stock exchanges quivered. The British Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mr. Lloyd George, wrote,
"On the 27th, the volume of selling became such that the foreign exchange market in New York gave way. From New York, this breakdown spread to other foreign exchanges generally. It affected Britain to a special degree, since London was the financial center of the world. In the last week of July, there was every prospect of such a crash in London as had never been known."
On July the 31st, as war evidently came nearer, Lloyd George told his friend, Lord Riddle,
"All the bankers and commercial people are begging us not to intervene. The governor of the Bank of England said to me, with tears in his eyes, 'Keep us out of it. We shall all be ruined if we are dragged in.'"
On that day, Friday the 31st, the stock exchange closed. The bank rate went up to 8%. The Bank of England asked for permission to issue notes instead of gold. The oppression of imminent catastrophe lay on all men. During the days that followed, it was as if all the fears and agonies of France were poured into one man, Paul Cambon, the French ambassador in London. On August the 1st, Germany declared war on Russia. General mobilization was decreed in Germany and France. No one doubted what this meant. Paul Cambon bluntly asked Sir Edward Grey,
Is England going to wait until French territory is invaded before intervening? If so, her help might be very belated.
I said that we could not propose to Parliament at this moment to send an expeditionary force to the continent. Such a step had always been regarded here as very dangerous and doubtful, unless our interests and obligations were deeply and desperately involved.
In Berlin, the Kaiser had persuaded himself that Britain would remain neutral.